Hey, I'm Tasmin, a journalist. Journalism is not a career, it's a lifestyle. And that's why I spend my Sunday evenings on the phone to Scott.
I'm Scott. I'm the recipient of these phone calls. I'm also a comms person and I just made a bunch of potatoes. I don't know why I stated that.
I think we're losing our minds.
No, I think it is the world that has become less sane around us.
And what's the thing that's been driving you insane this week, Scott?
The price of RAM. See, I'd like to
Mm.
buy a new phone in a month. I'd like to do so many computing things, but I can't because RAM. And I don't mean the amazing and super underrated Paul McCartney album, of which came out, I believe, in 1970 or 71. Really good record, but like random access memory and not the Daft Punk variation.
Okay, so why is that on your mind? Why is it going to affect the price of your phone? Why might you not buy a new phone?
Well, AI is
Of course,
doing
the
some.
answer to everything.
Yes, the answer to everything is AI. You don't watch this, just put the question into a large language model and it will tell you something and placate you. But in all honesty, uh, computing devices, including the projector that is to your left, the dehumidifier that's to your right, the computer which I'm speaking on, the computer which you're speaking on, etc., all these require RAM. And RAM used to be bountiful and plentiful and cheap. You can go to the store and buy RAM, and you could feed an entire family of four with, well, maybe not, but still, RAM is important. It's in every computing device, and it was easy to come by. And now it's not because AI data centers are hogging up all the RAM.
And what is RAM used for inside AI data centers?
So inside all computers, it's used for, again, it's random access memory. It's a volatile memory that allows computers to store things temporarily. The call of which we're currently on is being stored in the memory of our own computers. So the processes that run the video programs and the audio can continue to work until they no longer need to. And AI data centers use RAM to help with training, models and processing in a data center, which includes training AI or actually running the AI models. Data centers require a special high frequency RAM and high speed RAM that you and I as consumers do not have access to, nor do we need access to it.
Okay, so if AI uses or needs a different kind of RAM, how come that we're feeling the impact at the consumer level?
That's a good question. So first off, there are 3 manufacturers in the world, 2 in Korea, 1 based in the States. I believe
Mhm.
it's Samsung, it's SK Hynix, and it's Micron Technologies. And these people control 90% of all RAM just worldwide.
Yeah.
And they are shifting their focus and they're shifting their manufacturing. A lot of the products of which they were making, they're shifting to these RAM for AI data centers using the same materials. But the RAM that the AI data centers need requires 3 times the amount of materials. It's not like they're using just 3 times the amount of product and marking it up 3 times. There's an immense demand for this, special type of RAM, and they're taking the allotted materials and manufacturing for consumer RAM, at least 60% of it, and shifting it towards data centers. And that creates a scarcity that didn't exist prior for consumer oriented RAM, which is then just driving up the cost.
That's super interesting. So it's not that like the actual products, like the RAM product is being built and then like AI is gobbling it all up. It's that like the actual materials that are needed to build the product in the first place are being diverted to this like special type of RAM that AI does need.
Yeah, that's correct. So these manufacturers realize that they can charge well more than 3 times per high bandwidth memory than they can for 1 unit of consumer memory. There's
Mhm.
crazy demand for high bandwidth memory because everyone's building data centers, more people are building data centers, more labs need to train more models and post-train models and store those models and run those models. So there's crazy demand for that, and that's eating into consumer RAM, which then makes it more expensive to do things like buy laptops, buy
Yeah.
phones, buy whatever device uses RAM, which is most computing devices.
Yeah, it's really interesting the pivot that you mentioned because, like someone like SK Hynix, I specifically remember having their like SD cards in sort of like various devices growing up. They've always been around in the sort of memory game. Are you seeing that they are deprioritizing the consumer products that they've historically made, like, broadly? Like, will we see an actual change in the business to which like they will kind of drop out of the consumer market? And I'm also interested in this because, as far as I'm aware, RAM tends to be sort of soldered in, like fixed into devices. So it's not like, as a consumer, you can think, well, let me get the product with like the lower RAM right now. And then, in 12 months, 18 months, whatever it may be, when like the market potentially normalizes, depending, of course, on the way that AI does sort of shake out, then I can upgrade it at that point. But that's not necessarily possible because RAM tends to be sort of like fixed in devices.
Yeah. So first off, there are other manufacturers of RAM. They're just sort of like mostly cobbling together RAM using parts bought from these three manufacturers. A lot of
Okay.
those have exited the consumer market and decided to just sell to AI data centers and the like because it's more lucrative. If they can make
Mm-hmm.
more money for the materials, the raw materials of which they have, they will do that. Market has dictated that. That's one thing. Also, it's worth noting that solid state drives are also experiencing the crunch because they're also needed for AI data centers. Some of the solid state drives that are used for consumers are also sold to AI data center
Okay.
providers and so on. And because of that, that's also driving up the price of solid state drives. I have a solid state drive in my computer. You have one on your phone. I have one on my phone. But prices have skyrocketed. On the RAM side, they skyrocketed about 170%. Probably more on the solid state drives to the point where the drive that I currently have in my PlayStation 5 is worth maybe 2 to 3 times more than the PlayStation 5 itself. We're seeing a lot of solid state drive manufacturers, RAM manufacturers, etc., exit the consumer market because they can just make leaps and
Yeah.
bounds more in data centers. In terms of buying less RAM now and upgrading at a later date when the market subsides, which at the earliest would happen in maybe 2028 because these manufacturers are spinning up warehouses and plants that can build more RAM or at least increase the availability of RAM. Uh, and the way that a lot of devices, modern computing devices, pretty much all phones and most laptop computers work is that the RAM is soldered in. If I buy a Mac, the RAM I get at the jump is RAM I have for the life of that Mac. Now, there have been a lot of lawsuits and things related to that being an anti consumer practice because, if previously, when I first started buying computers and building computers, I could just upgrade memory whenever. Ditto
Mm.
with laptops, you'd be able to pop it into a Windows-based laptop. But things like Macs, things like Android phones and iPhones, uh, a lot of computers, the RAM you get from the jump is the RAM you have. You're just stuck with whatever you buy. So just buy something with good RAM now or don't.
Honestly, Scott, you're talking to a gal here that needs to delete photos and videos and just like old apps and everything off of her phone whenever she wants to take a new photo or download a new app because it is just full to the brim. But mostly with absolutely nothing. Mostly it's the operating system. Just an old phone. Who aren't the ones getting the new phone every single time there's a new iteration, right? Like if you're a person that holds onto your devices, it's really going to sting when it, like next year, the year after, as you mentioned, if you are looking at an upgrade, that's going to hit your wallet.
Yeah, so what you were actually describing there is just space. So that's your solid state disk drive of which you need to clear. And I mean, I probably need to do the same thing on my phone. But RAM is the thing that allows for more applications, more powerful applications to work.
Hmm.
And, as we get each iteration of iOS, each iteration of the Mac, more and more applications in AI, that requires more memory. If we want to be able to use these amazing advances in AI, if we want to use them to their fullest potential, like a lot of people are not going to be able to do that purely because the lack of memory of which their systems have. More advanced applications require memory. With the RAM crisis, it's sort of, cool. We're training large language models to do amazing things, define amazing, but
Yeah.
the ability to use said things, it will eventually decrease over time as RAM becomes less and less available.
Are we really surprised by that? Like the running theme of AI is the concentration of power, right? And actually building these systems in a specific way, whereby, in the long run, let's be real, they're only going to be benefiting a specific subcategory of society. And I think we see this with SK Hynix's IPO in the States recently. It was the largest ever US listing by a foreign company. It listed early last month and raised 26.5 billion, which is just obscene. But of course, investors can justify that because it's one of three main players that are in this game, as you've described. And it's such a hot, frothy market, really. I'm curious, are you seeing any competitors coming out of China?
There are RAM manufacturers in China, and recent news was Apple was trying to buy RAM from them. They're not allowed to currently from the as per the United States because it's a I believe that just like the trade deal with them would be blacklisted or frowned upon based on whatever existing trade laws and boundaries that we currently have. Um, the more RAM that's introduced into the market, the greater the supply is. Perhaps that can bring down the price. So we'll see there. In terms of AI, though, like AI requires as many resources as we can throw at it, be it power, water, memory, RAM, or storage, solid state drives, among many other resources. And the AI industry has taken and taken and taken and driven up the prices. I use large language models regularly, so I see the immense benefits of doing so. I would say that I'm an incredibly small subset of people that are benefiting from the use of large language models. Perhaps not in the same way that world governments and major corporations are. I find them to be incredibly valuable. Uh, for the billions of others, I see this more as an immense net negative than a net positive. And eventually, in order for AI to continue to exist, more data centers need to be built, which means more resources need to be consumed, but at the expense of consumer pricing.
Mhm. Everybody, like proponents of AI will say, it's going to solve everything. Some of our biggest challenges is going to solve famine, right? But actually, we have enough food in the world already and we still have famine. It's actually it's a problem with distribution, and this AI memory shortage really taps into that, because what you're doing, what you've just described there in AI taking and taking and taking, is doing it again. It's taking from consumers and using these materials for this industry again, this industry that no doubt will only benefit a select few in the long run. And ultimately, all of this is pointless. Like, why are we investing in AI on the promise of it solving society's biggest problems when actually we have a distribution problem already, and AI is exacerbating that?
I mean, it's kind of like a frog in boiling water sort of situation in the sense of like, trillions have been poured into AI and AI needs to succeed because so much money is, propping it up. And to go
Like, is
back
the
on that, or
US
to
economy growing without AI?
I'm no economist, so I can't answer that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even know if most economists can answer that. Um, but to pause or to double back for a second would dramatically drop the value of those investments and thus those companies. The way that the world works, no one will allow that to happen.
I'm still interested in how you think we might move forward. So when it comes to RAM, what are the solutions, Scott?
I mean, on the consumer side of things, like consumers are either going to have to deal with the fact that things are getting more expensive or just don't buy more consumer electronics. For a completionist nerd like me, that gets harder, but it's something I'm willing to stick with, especially since everything is getting more expensive. And hopefully this gets remedied at some point in the future because, again, manufacturers are spinning up more fabrication plants and
Mm-hmm.
RAM is getting, which will increase more RAM to the market. But is that, specialty RAM for AI data centers or is that RAM for schlubs like me and you? Honestly, it's just a wait and see. Also, it's worth
Mm-hmm.
noting that, like, in 2022 to 2023, a lot of these manufacturers were holding on to, they're literally warehousing 31 weeks worth of RAM that they could not sell because they overshot what consumer demand for consumer
Mm-hmm.
electronics was. And because of that, they paused or they slowed down the manufacturing of RAM, which is how we got where we are now. Like, this, what we're dealing with now is something that happened pre-widespread adoption of AI. Right now, we're kind of just stuck with the same old phone, which you need to delete all your photos off and everything in order to actually make a call. Or this phone, which is the worst iPhone I've ever used in my entire life, the 16 Pro Max.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like you've just hit on another theme of, this broader debate of what's the point in all of these like AI efficiencies and gains in products and services when actually the cost of living is just shooting up so high for everybody, at least it feels that way, that no one's going to be able to buy anything anyway. So we just talked about how AI is increasing the price of everything, specifically RAM. How has AI pushed up the price of your crinkle cutter that you were using to make the fries?
How is AI ruining my crinkle cutter?
Yeah.
I mean, AI, like, AI is driving up the cost of everything and the cost of like computing, and that cost is eventually passed on to the consumer. Like, the vast majority, like, there's a bunch of things that are raising prices, like tariffs and so on. And there's no doubt that the crinkle cutter I bought was not, like, there's no way that it was made anywhere other than like East Asia. So
Mm.
you have the price of oil going up because of the Strait of Hormuz and everything that's happening in Iran. You have tariffs that are being imposed. And then you have like all these companies are like investing in AI, and the cost of doing business with relating to computing costs is increasing. And so, like, that plus oil, because shipping and logistics, like, those aren't all weighted equally. I'm sure import export plus oil is huge, but computing costs, like, my SaaS cost or my cost of putting something in the AWS is increased, even if I am, say, OXO, which I believe is the maker of my crinkle cutter. They've seen that and they've weighed that plus shipping plus tariffs on the cost of my crinkle cutter. So that's your answer.
So thank you so much for that, Scott. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Taz. Always a pleasure.